Humans have a fundamental need to belong, to feel valued and connected in relationships with family, social groups, and community. For teens who are actively forming their identity and are uniquely sensitive to peer interactions and relationships, this need is amplified. So what happens when a teen is bullied, making them feel devalued and weakening their sense of belonging? Is cyberbullying different or worse than other forms? For answers, I spoke with Dr. Tracy Vaillancourt, who has spent her career studying the effects of bullying. This is the first of a mini-series of 3 episodes on digital health and screen use in teens. You're listening to Healthy Teens. I'm your host, Dr. Nicholas Chadi. Among many other titles and accolades, Dr. Tracy Vaillancourt is a Canada Research Chair in School-Based Mental Health and Violence Prevention at the University of Ottawa, where she is cross-appointed as a full professor in counseling psychology in the faculties of Education and Social Sciences. She has long held a research interest in bullying and its impacts on youth mental health. Tracy, welcome to the show.
Hello.
So let's dive right in. What is bullying and why do kids bully each other?
So bullying is a systematic abuse of power, and it has a few features that differentiate it from aggression. So all bullying is aggression, but not all aggression is bullying. It tends to be repetitive in nature. It's intentional. And the real important aspect of this is it occurs in the context of a power imbalance. Now, the reason why kids bully is very complicated. So we can get to that a little bit more, but I wanted to just give you a first definition of bullying.
Yeah, that's great. And maybe you can help us understand what are the rates of bullying in the adolescent population? How many kids are bullies and how many are being bullied?
So about 30% of kids and adolescents are bullied occasionally within a month, and 10% are bullied ruthlessly every day. And those rates are consistent around the world. So you can use different ways of assessing it, different populations, different age groups. It comes down over time. So older kids bully at rates that are lower than middle schoolers, for example. But typically we use the rate of 30% and 10%.
That really seems quite high. And you mentioned every month, so it's not just an isolated event. Tracy, thanks for sharing those numbers. And I know you've been researching bullying and mental health for over 25 years. What do you see as the biggest shifts since kids, teens especially, have moved so much of their lives online?
So a lot of people want to think that the online world is so different from the face-to-face world of children and youth, and it really isn't. Most cyberbullying is actually just an extension of what has happened on the school ground or soccer field or whatever, right? So it's like a spillover of what's happening in their day-to-days. There are some kids, and it's very small percentage, that are just uniquely bullied online. But that said, it's just kind of another form of bullying, but it just compounds it because unlike you and I getting into it at school over the course of a few weeks, when it's put online, it becomes permanent. And so that actually adds to the stress and distress that kids feel and teens feel. So it's an extension of face-to-face, but it has a unique effect on mental health, especially suicidality.
I do want to hear more about that. And, you've mentioned how cyberbullying and in-person bullying isn't all that different, even though when I think of, bullying in person, it seems like a public event, kids being called out or being pushed around. And, the sense that maybe cyberbullying is a bit more private, even though private is relative when we think of how youth connect online these days. But do you have a sense, and you mentioned mental health, whether one form of bullying in person versus cyberbullying may be worse in terms of mental health or well-being effects on kids?
So one of the things that you said, I just want to highlight that most kids actually bully in an indirect way. So physical bullying declines with age and pretty rapidly, but indirect aggression increases over time. It gets replaced. So physical aggression is replaced with indirect aggression, and that's where you gang up on somebody with other peers, you exclude them from the peer group, you spread rumors about them, you give them the silent treatment. So this is really commonly used, and it's used across the lifespan. So we would see it in our faculty meetings. You're going to see it in the corporate world. You're going to see it across adult society. So that said, cyberbullying does have one unique association that's different from other forms of bullying, and that's it's linked to suicidality. So there is an increased risk of suicidality that's specific to cyberbullying. So not to suggest that other forms of bullying aren't linked to suicidality, because they certainly are, but it increases the risk of attempting and completing suicide.
Wow. So that's definitely quite significant when we think
Absolutely.
of mental health effects. And you've sort of alluded to this, how forms of bullying may change across the lifespan. But when we think of cyberbullying in itself, how does it typically start? Are there like early signs we can teach our kids to look out for? Things we can do to intervene before it comes at them in full force?
So I think taking care of the face-to-face stuff, in a sense, takes care of the cyberbullying. But in terms of what it starts looking like, it starts with little nasty messages and little nasty comments on somebody's Instagram post or Snapchat, and a gang up on that. So that's kind of how it starts. It's not that sophisticated in the beginning where you have somebody who's anonymous and attacking you. Kids pretty much know who's attacking them online. Of course, there'll always be some exceptions. It does get more sophisticated as they get older, but the crude form of it in, let's say, grade 4 to grade 6 is just these nasty comments and mockery and that sort of thing online. In order to prevent it, and prevention's like a big word because we really do a terrible job at even reducing it. I've never seen a study yet that has shown to prevent bullying. It's hard when you see the rates that we have, and also it is rewarded in a lot of ways, and we can get into that after. But some things that parents can do is really just monitor their children's peer relationships, make sure that they're also aware of not just if their kid's being bullied, but if they bully others. We tend to pay really close attention to when our kids are hurting or are hurt, but not when they are hurting others. You know, we would go a long way if we were open-minded about the idea that all kids have the capacity to treat others poorly and to do something about it if we become aware of it. Monitoring their social media use would be very important as well. A lot of these things happen and kids suffer in silence. In our studies, we show that by grade 10, 85% of kids who are bullied are not telling their parents. So I think having a good idea of who they're interacting with online would go a long way.
Well, I'm thinking to myself, it isn't all that easy to monitor online use. And I'm wondering, are there certain kids who are more at risk of being cyberbullied? Aside from sort of really having a look of what's happening in their online spaces, are there red flags to look out for, or even risk factors that we'd know would set some kids aside for a higher risk of being bullied?
So we used to look at what are the characteristics of kids who are bullied, and we kind of flip that script and avoid that kind of language just because it implies that there's something wrong with the individual, that they've done something to engender this toxic behavior that's directed at them, when the truth of the matter is that they should be spared from oppression and humiliation and the like, right? So we really should be thinking about how to change the behavior of those who bully. That said, though, some children are more provocative in their behavior, and it does elicit negative attention from their peers. It still doesn't make it right. They should never be treated poorly, even if they are dysregulated or impulsive and things like that. You're more likely, obviously, to be cyberbullied if you're online a lot. Some kids and teens who are more socially motivated tend to get in trouble with their peers. So they're trying to climb the status hierarchy ladder, and that gets them in trouble because there's always somebody that's also trying to do the same thing. So I mean, I know I'm not like giving you a solid answer here, and it seems like I'm kind of all over the place, but it's so complicated, right? And I'm just trying to give a really honest response to your question.
Right. And thank you, Tracy. I really like what you said about, shifting the language and not pointing fingers at specific risk factors, but maybe more broadly stating how bullying is a behavior that should be redirected and addressed in all people. in some situations may lead to bullying. And of course, spending more time online will increase your chances of eventually being cyberbullied. So Tracy, I want to jump back and speak about something you mentioned earlier. You mentioned how bullying sometimes can be rewarded, but can you tell us just a little bit more? How actually can bullying be rewarded or cyberbullying be rewarded if we're focusing more in the online space?
85% of the time when kids get bullied, there are peers present, and those peers play a role, and they tend to not side with the victim. They tend to side with the perpetrator. Online, it's like clicks and likes and reshares and things like that are rewarding the individual who's treating somebody with cruelty. And that cruelty is what sells. It really is. It's like we've monetized rage, we've monetized aggression and cruelty online. And so if I'm a young person and I don't have a fully developed prefrontal cortex, I'm looking at this and I think, hey, like, people really like what I'm saying and what I'm doing. They must respect me, and they don't recognize that they're actually feared. Bullying has a problem, and it's maintained because it is rewarded and reinforced.
And I mean, that's concerning in and of itself. And I'm thinking, you mentioned, peers and how, peers and bystanders can even be rewarded if they're, in the context of bullying.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's not something that happens in isolation. And the bystanders sometimes reinforce the bullying behavior, which then is so isolating for the person who's being attacked. Not only are you being ridiculed and humiliated by this one individual, but there's a gang behind them that is encouraging the person who should be discouraged. So that is problematic. We often turn a blind eye when we should be saying something. We can be apathetic in our response, minding our own business, and we shouldn't mind our own business on this topic because it is the ultimate unfair fight. I said it's a systematic abuse of power. The person doesn't have the capacity to manage this alone. So it behooves us to intervene on their behalf. So being a defender is way better than being a bystander.
But can you tell us more about the role of peer groups? How can they also be protective? What's their role? How can young people help young people reduce bullying or help with the issue?
They're really the key to this. So when we look at our best efforts, we get about a 20% reduction in bullying. But when peers are involved and we can engage the bystander, the peer group, then you see that even improving and improving by quite a lot. Peers are the ones who set the norms. They set the standards. They're the ones who dictate what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. You would think it would be the adults, but it really is the peers who are liking the tweet. I guess young people aren't on Twitter, so let's not be silly, but they're the ones liking the Instagram post and the like. And so they're affording the power. So if we could harness that and get them to be better citizens, get them to care about their peers more, then we would have healthier teens, healthier children, and fewer issues with bullying.
That makes a lot of sense to me and resonates also. I'm thinking as a young person, I probably would listen to another person my age quite a bit for something as personal as bullying. And I'm also thinking, so what if you have a peer who's actually witnessing bullying, a friend getting bullied, or even someone in your class? Can you speak to any potential effects that might have? Just the fact of witnessing, even in the online space, someone bullying someone else.
There's a lot of evidence that shows that witnessing is also problematic to the person's health and wellness, as well as their physiology. It's not comfortable to see somebody being treated poorly. You're also learning lessons about power and the abuse of power that are not very good for how you're going to interact with people in the future. So if you are seeing your friend be bullied online, the best thing you could do would be to take screenshots, share them with an adult in your school community, and then reassure your friend that you're there for them, you care about them. Those are the things that you should be doing. What you should not be doing is ignoring it. What you should not be doing is taking a video recording and sharing it with others so that that person could be mocked. That's not what friends do. Friends support each other, and friends defend each other, and friends would be reporting this information to adults who can help.
So being proactive and kind, just generally to try to address the issue. And I'm thinking now, do schools have a responsibility to intervene in cases of bullying? I mean, we've spoke just about parents and how they can monitor use. And, I think that's one thing. But then teens spend a lot of time at school and, this can come up.
Absolutely. And I'll speak to Ontario because I'm in Ontario, but and just as one example, but every province and the territories have very similar policies. So in Ontario, it's actually in the Education Act. So they have to do something. They're legally obligated to do something to intervene. And there's a very strict way of how it's dealt with. So the reporting obligations there, their approaches that they're going to use are quite prescriptive and the like. So if a parent's listening to this and they're interested in what Ontario's law is, it's 169.1 of the Education Act. In any event, so yes, they're trying their best. The challenging part, though, is that schools have a lot of things that they have to manage, right? And with a rate of 30% and, not very good, efficacious interventions, there are a lot of kids who are still being hurt, even though schools are trying their best to curtail this issue and to protect students.
So this is all very interesting, and it makes sense. With such high rates, it would be unrealistic that, every incident would be addressed. And I'm thinking it's probably a team effort. Parents have a role, but other trusted adults, coaches in other spaces, so that we can really get to the issue.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for pointing this out. And it makes me want to learn a little bit more. And you mentioned, an extreme example like suicide risk and some harms for mental health. But more broadly, what are the more immediate threats to a teen's either mental or physical health from bullying?
So, and one of the things that, as you know, we don't use causation quite readily in science, especially in our area. So we tend to not ever use causation, but in this context, we actually can use causation. Study after study have shown that individuals who were bullied in childhood or adolescence, those scars still remain, that they still have higher depression, higher anxiety rates, higher suicidality. It affects all aspects of their functioning. So it's not just this area of mental health. It affects their financial prospects in the future. It changes the way they see the world. And this really comes back to the fact that the need to belong is a fundamental human motivator. And bullying thwarts that fundamental need to belong.
That's quite powerful, Tracy. Just thinking that being bullied at an early part of life can cause really all these problems and issues later on through the life course. And it makes me wonder, can you speak to, or maybe research has shown how bullying actually may be affecting the brain and how it develops? Do you have any insights into that?
I do, because I think I've done the bulk on the neurobiology of bullying victimization. We've done a lot of studies on this. So there's a few different pathways. So sometimes a person has a biological risk that is then exaggerated because of their poor treatment. And then other times they don't have that biological risk, but their biology changes a function of the treatment that they receive. And so I think the best way to explain this would be just to focus on the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, so the HPA axis, which is the stress response system. And so studies, including studies that we have done, have shown that it changes the way they manage stress in the future. So what you tend to see is a dysregulation of the HPA axis. So they either overproduce or underproduce cortisol, and it depends on where they are in their bullying pathway. So at the beginning, you see high cortisol as you would with any acute stressor. And then over time, they adapt, and then you see a downregulation of cortisol. And that has implications for inflammation, which then also has implications for cardiovascular disease, cancers, and the like. So, it's pretty scary stuff. This is not a unique stressor, it's all interpersonal stressors behave this way. So child maltreatment has a very similar profile. If you are in a family where there's a lot of violence, it's maybe not directed at you per se, but you're witnessing it, that activates your stress response system. And then in turn, your body needs to adapt because it's really not, it's problematic to be bathed in cortisol all the time and for your brain to be bathed in cortisol. And I'll just give you one more example of the neurobiological effects. So we looked at this longitudinally. We looked at kids who were bullied, and we looked at the effects of cortisol in their brain, because cortisol, it binds. It's a glucocorticoid receptor site is what it's binding with, which are found mostly in the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus. So this is your areas of the brain that are associated with executive functions, but also with memory and learning. So we found that individuals who were bullied in childhood had higher cortisol, and this in turn mapped on to dysregulation or poor memory specific to the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus. So we know that kids who are bullied don't do well in school a lot of times. The mechanism has always been thought of as they're just maybe stressed out and not paying attention, but there's also a brain-based reason for it as well.
Wow. There's a lot here.
Am I just going into the weeds?
Well, I think there's a lot in here. I'll try to rephrase some things that I take away from what you just shared. And thank you so much for contributing so deeply to the field and the understanding of what bullying means for children and adults eventually. I'm understanding that bullying affects many parts of the brain. It affects how, brain responds to stress. And this translates into all these physical health impacts and mental health impacts, throughout life. I wonder, are there certain protective factors or ways in which either the brain or outside factors can help young people who've been bullied recover or regain maybe the losses that they've had through bullying?
So this is the area that's not as clear. I imagine there's going to be recovery, because we are so plastic as humans. We have neuroplasticity all the way till our last breath. So I'm expecting that there will be some recovery. It's not been examined though. So I think we need to be thinking about that a bit more carefully. I know that when I present this information, it's scary to hear, especially parents hear this and they worry about their child's wellness today, but also in the future and what that's going to mean for them. The reason I do the neurobiology stuff is because I really want to highlight the effects, not to scare parents, but to more so to scare policymakers to really prioritize its reduction. So if we, really understood this is not just kids being kids or a rite of passage, that this is something that can fundamentally alter a person's health trajectory, then maybe we would be more motivated to really do something with our prevention and intervention efforts. So I am hopeful, but I just don't know at this point.
So, okay, well, let's say I'm a parent, the school calls, my kid is being bullied or bullying someone else. What do I do when I hear that my child or another child is being treated unfairly?
They need to be calm. And it's hard to be calm when your kid is hurt. When my children hurt, I hurt. And it's as if I'm living the pain directly myself. So I understand that we are not at our best in terms of advocacy when our children are hurting. You have a chat with your child. They're going to have very specific ideas of how you should manage this. And it's going to be about you not doing anything. And that's the wrong approach. They think that adults are going to mess it up. And sometimes we do mess it up. But more often than not, when an adult intervenes, the child's social world improves. So your child's going to be crying and begging you not to say anything, not to do anything. A lot of times when kids are bullied, they think if they make themselves smaller, things will improve. But that's not what's going to happen. Things are not going to improve by making yourself smaller. Things will improve by adults intervening. And importantly, if your kid is bullying somebody and the school calls you on that, be open-minded. They don't get that wrong. they really recognize that parents are going to be defensive and that it's a lot of trouble and it's a difficult conversation. It's not one they want to have readily, but they are doing it because they're trying to improve the school environment and ameliorate the lives of children. So be open-minded to the fact that your kid may be doing something a little problematic to their peers.
I think this is really good advice. Of course, as parents, I think this thought of, I hope my kid doesn't get bullied or isn't bullying someone else is there, and having an open mind and being there to contribute to the issue really more generally is so important.
But I want to also say, and I think I missed an opportunity to say that there are things that parents can do. So we know that when kids are bullied and they tell an adult, especially a safe adult in their school, that bullying tends to be reduced almost immediately. So that is really important to tell, not suffer in silence. We know that kids who maybe have a terrible existence at school but have a very caring family do better than those who have a family that's disengaged or not as caring and nurturing. So, the environment you're creating for your children is also important. And then we also know that kids are most resilient when they have adults in their lives who are there for them. So, the importance of coaches, the importance of teachers, the importance of clinicians like yourself, all of those individuals play an important role in helping kids who are not doing well in this domain.
That's really concrete, Tracy, and I can certainly see how there's a role for pretty much all adults interacting with kids in this issue and preventing bullying and responding to it. And I imagine how this could lead to key conversations at several levels, right?
Absolutely.
Administrators, parent groups and committees, among teachers and staff. So there's certainly a role to play for many, many stakeholders here. And one more thing I do want to ask, we talked about the role of parents and adults, but looking at the system and schools more specifically, is there something that could make the school environment perhaps less conducive to bullying or even a positive space to reduce in-person or cyberbullying?
Absolutely. So every school has a culture of its own. And the culture is, in a sense, dictated by the norms that are established by young people. So if those norms are corrupt, then your school environment is corrupt. If those norms are pro-social, the environment is pro-social. So we really need to be paying attention to the politics of the playground. We need to be thinking about who's setting the norms for our school communities. So if you have high status bullies in your school and you're letting them run amok of the place and they are bullying others without any sanctions, you're going to have a very problematic environment for a lot of young people.
Thank you, Tracy. I think this is really good and very rich advice. As the parent of two young kids, I do worry, right, about, how bullying can impact children's health and lives. And, you mentioned that bullying can be a personal issue, but there's probably a need for a broader understanding. And I like to think that whenever there's a way to be active and respond to something, it's sort of a way to feel more engaged. Well, thank you so much, Tracy. This really has been a very enjoyable conversation.
It certainly has. Thank you.
Dr. Tracy Vaillancourt holds the Canada Research Chair in Youth Mental Health and Violence Protection. She also sits on the advisory board of the Canadian Paediatric Society's Centre for Healthy Screen Use. Their site has free resources on managing screen use, including tips on developing a family media plan and setting screen limits with teens. We'll link to those in the show notes, or you can find them at healthyscreenuse.cps.ca. The causes of bullying are complex, but the results are clear. Children and teens who are bullied face real, serious, and long-lasting effects. To best support them, create as positive an environment as possible at home and make sure they know you're there to support and listen. And even if you don't think your kid is being bullied or could be a bully, make conversations about how to respond when they witness it a regular thing. It might make all the difference. Healthy Teens is brought to you by the Canadian Pediatric Society. Today's episode was produced by Jen Briette. I'm Dr. Nicholas Chadi. If you like this episode, subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts and share with a friend. Please send comments or ideas for future episodes to info@cps.ca with the subject line, Healthy Teens. Thanks for tuning in.